Welcome to One Book, One Coffee, where we gather to explore books that touch the soul and expand the mind. Today, you're choosing to dive into Hermann Hesse's The Glass Bead Game. This choice sets you apart. In a world full of endless scrolling and binge-watching, you're here, investing your time in a journey of learning and self-discovery. The Glass Bead Game is no ordinary book. It's a profound exploration of intellect, culture, and the philosophical underpinnings of our existence. Hesse's masterpiece is celebrated for its intricate narratives and rich philosophical insights. Though not frequently highlighted by modern public figures like Bill Gates or Oprah, Hesse's influence is undeniable. His works have long been cherished by generations of thinkers and creators who value depth and introspection over fleeting trends. Hermann Hesse, born in 1877, was a German-Swiss poet, novelist, and painter. His life was marked by a search for meaning and enlightenment, shaped by personal struggles including 2 world wars and a lifelong battle with depression. This book, written in the isolated years of the 1940s, was his final novel, a culmination of his intellectual pursuits and reflections on culture. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this book together, chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. Hermann Hesse was a German-Swiss writer and painter who sought meaning in a tumultuous world, shaped by his experiences during 2 world wars and deep personal introspection. Picture this. You're settling into your favorite chair with a steaming cup of coffee, and I'm about to tell you about one of the most fascinating thought experiments in literature. Hermann Hesse's The Glass Bead Game opens by inviting us into a world that feels both impossibly distant and eerily familiar, a future society called Castalia, where intellectual pursuit has become the highest form of human achievement. Now, think about this for a moment. What if we lived in a world where the smartest, most creative minds weren't chasing stock options or viral fame, but were instead dedicated purely to the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom? That's exactly what Hesse presents us with in Castalia, a province set sometime in the 23rd century, where an intellectual elite has created what might be the ultimate ivory tower. Imagine a place that's part monastery, part university, and part think tank, all rolled into one. The scholars of Castalia have withdrawn from what they call the Feuilleton period of human history, that chaotic time when information was cheap, entertainment was king, and serious thought was drowned out by what we might recognize today as clickbait culture. Sound familiar? Hesse was writing this in the 1940s, yet his critique of information overload and cultural superficiality feels like he was peering directly into our smartphone-saturated world. The heart of this intellectual paradise is something called the Glass Bead Game itself, though Hesse is deliberately mysterious about its exact nature. Think of it as the ultimate synthesis of human knowledge, a kind of cosmic chess game that weaves together mathematics, music, philosophy, and science into patterns of meaning that are both beautiful and profound. The players of this game, the intellectual aristocracy of Castalia, spend their lives mastering these intricate connections between different fields of knowledge. Here's where it gets really interesting, and where Hesse's vision speaks directly to our modern world. The Glass Bead Game represents something we desperately need today: the ability to see connections across disciplines, to think holistically rather than in silos. In our age of hyperspecialization, where experts know more and more about less and less, Castalia offers a countervision of scholars who can dance between poetry and physics, who can find the mathematical harmony in a Bach fugue or the musical structure in a philosophical argument. But here's the catch, and this is where Hesse's genius really shines through. This intellectual utopia comes with a price. The Castalians have achieved their pure pursuit of knowledge by completely cutting themselves off from the messy, complicated, often painful world of ordinary human experience. They don't engage with politics, they don't concern themselves with practical problems, and they certainly don't dirty their hands with the day-to-day struggles of regular people. Now, think about this tension in your own life. How often do we retreat into our own bubbles of expertise or interest, losing touch with the broader human experience? Whether it's the tech entrepreneur who's revolutionizing artificial intelligence but can't maintain a relationship, or the academic who knows everything about medieval literature but nothing about how to connect with their students, we see echoes of Castalia's dilemma everywhere. Hesse sets up this world not as a simple utopia or dystopia, but as a complex meditation on the role of intellectual life in human society. The Castalians have solved one problem, the chaos and superficiality of mass culture, but they've created another, the isolation of wisdom from life itself. It's like having the most beautiful, perfectly tuned violin in the world, but keeping it locked away in a glass case where no one can ever hear its music. The introduction to this world reads like a historical document, as if Hesse is an anthropologist describing a distant civilization. But this narrative device is brilliantly deceptive. By presenting Castalia as if it were historical fact, he makes us consider it not as fantasy, but as possibility. Could we create such a society? Should we? And what would we gain or lose in the process? Consider how this applies to our current moment. We live in an age where we have unprecedented access to information and knowledge, yet we often feel overwhelmed rather than enlightened. Social media algorithms create echo chambers that feel almost like mini Castalias, where we interact only with ideas and people that confirm our existing beliefs. Meanwhile, the real world, with all its complexity and contradiction, feels increasingly distant from our digital lives. The world of Castalia that Hesse presents is seductive precisely because it offers what many of us crave: a space for deep thought, meaningful conversation, and the patient pursuit of truth. In a culture that demands instant answers and quick solutions, the idea of a society dedicated to contemplation and synthesis feels almost revolutionary. As we prepare to dive deeper into this remarkable story, we're invited to hold these tensions in our minds. The Glass Bead Game isn't just a novel about a future society. It's a mirror reflecting our own relationship with knowledge, wisdom, and the question of how we should live. The journey ahead will challenge us to think about whether true wisdom can exist in isolation from human suffering and joy, and whether the pursuit of perfect knowledge might come at the cost of perfect humanity. Picture this. You're sitting in a quiet cafe, steam rising from your coffee, and someone asks you about the most mysterious intellectual pursuit ever imagined. That's exactly where we find ourselves today as we dive into Hermann Hesse's fascinating exploration of how the Glass Bead Game came to be. It's a story that begins in chaos and ends in something approaching perfection, much like watching a master craftsperson transform raw materials into something breathtaking. Now think about this for a moment. Have you ever wondered how our greatest cultural achievements actually begin? Hesse takes us back to what he calls the age of the feuilleton, a time remarkably similar to our own information-saturated era. Picture newspapers filled with trivial cultural commentary, intellectual discourse reduced to bite-sized entertainment, and serious scholarship drowning in an ocean of superficial chatter. Sound familiar? This was the world that gave birth to the Glass Bead Game, born not from abundance, but from a desperate hunger for something deeper. The game didn't spring forth fully formed like some intellectual Athena. Instead, it evolved slowly, organically, the way all truly meaningful things do. Imagine watching a river carve its path through stone, patient and persistent. That's how the Glass Bead Game developed, starting with simple mathematical exercises and musical notations, gradually expanding to encompass entire universes of human knowledge. In its earliest form, the game resembled what we might recognize today as advanced pattern recognition. Think of a brilliant mathematician who suddenly realizes that the structure of a Bach fugue, mirrors the orbital mechanics of planets, or a philosopher who discovers that ancient Chinese poetry follows the same logical progressions as quantum physics equations. The early players were essentially intellectual archaeologists, digging up these hidden connections and polishing them until they gleamed like precious stones. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something we can absolutely relate to in our digital age. The game began to develop its own language, its own symbols, its own internal logic. Just as programmers today create elegant code that can make computers dance, sing, or solve impossibly complex problems, the Glass Bead Game players developed a symbolic system that could capture the essence of any field of human knowledge and show how it connected to every other field. Consider how this mirrors our modern search for interdisciplinary understanding. When a neuroscientist today discovers that the branching patterns of neurons resemble the structure of river deltas, or when an economist realizes that market behaviors follow the same mathematical principles as flocking birds, they're engaging in the same fundamental activity that drove the Glass Bead Game's evolution. They're seeking the hidden harmonies that connect all knowledge. The game's development wasn't without its critics and controversies, much like any revolutionary idea. Some scholars worried it was becoming too abstract, too removed from practical human concerns. Others feared it might replace genuine learning with mere intellectual gymnastics. These debates feel remarkably contemporary, don't they? We face similar questions today about artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and whether our digital tools are enhancing or replacing genuine human understanding. What made the Glass Bead Game truly revolutionary was its democratic yet elite nature. While only the most gifted minds could master its highest levels, its basic principles could be appreciated by anyone willing to think deeply about the connections between different areas of knowledge. It's like jazz music in this way, accessible to casual listeners, but revealing infinite depths to those who study its complexities. The game's evolution also reflected humanity's perpetual struggle between specialization and synthesis. As our knowledge expanded in every direction, the danger of fragmentation grew. Scientists knew more and more about smaller and smaller pieces of reality, while losing sight of the bigger picture. The Glass Bead Game emerged as a response to this crisis, a tool for weaving disparate threads of knowledge back into a coherent tapestry. Think about your own life for a moment. How often do you find yourself making unexpected connections between seemingly unrelated experiences? Maybe a conversation with your grandmother suddenly illuminates something you read in a business book, or a walk in nature provides insight into a relationship problem. These moments of synthesis, these flashes of recognition when patterns align, these are the seeds from which the Glass Bead Game grew. The game's ultimate achievement was creating a space where pure intellectual play could flourish without losing its connection to deeper truths. It wasn't play for play's sake, but play as a form of worship, a celebration of the magnificent complexity and underlying unity of existence. The players weren't escaping from reality, but diving deeper into its essential nature than most people ever dare to go. As we wrap up this exploration of the game's origins, consider how Hesse's vision speaks to our current moment. In an age of information overload, partisan divisions, and specialized knowledge silos, the Glass Bead Game offers a compelling alternative vision. It suggests that our highest calling might not be to accumulate more facts or win more arguments, but to discover the beautiful patterns that connect all human understanding. The story of the Glass Bead Game's evolution reminds us that our greatest intellectual achievements often emerge from our deepest dissatisfactions with the status quo. Sometimes, the most profound response to chaos isn't to impose rigid order, but to discover the hidden order that was there all along, waiting patiently for someone wise enough to recognize it. Picture this. You're holding your morning coffee, steam rising from the cup, and I'm about to tell you about a young boy whose entire life was shaped by a single moment of recognition. This is the story of Joseph Knecht's early years, and it's going to make you think differently about talent, education, and what it really means to find your calling. Joseph Knecht wasn't born into privilege or nobility. He came from what Hesse describes as perfectly ordinary circumstances, the kind of middle-class family you'd find in any small town. His father worked, his mother kept house, and young Joseph seemed destined for the same unremarkable path that millions of children follow. But here's where the story gets fascinating, because sometimes life has other plans entirely. When Joseph was around 12 years old, something extraordinary happened that would change everything. A music master from the elite educational province of Castalia visited his school. Now, think about this for a moment. How many times in your own life has a single encounter, a brief conversation, or even just a look from the right person at the right time completely altered your trajectory? That's exactly what happened to young Knecht. The music master wasn't just any teacher. He represented something that barely exists in our modern world. A person so deeply attuned to recognizing potential that he could spot it like a jeweler identifying a rare diamond in rough stone. During what seemed like a routine school visit, this master observed Joseph and saw something that even the boy himself didn't yet understand. It wasn't just intelligence, though Joseph certainly had that. It was something more elusive, more precious, the capacity for what Hesse calls the Glass Bead Game consciousness. Here's where it gets really interesting. The music master didn't see Joseph's potential through test scores or academic achievements. Instead, he recognized it through the boy's response to music, his intuitive grasp of mathematical relationships, and most importantly, his natural ability to see connections between seemingly unrelated ideas. In our world of standardized testing and rigid educational metrics, this kind of recognition feels almost magical, doesn't it? Think about how different this is from how we typically identify talent today. We measure, we quantify, we rank and sort children into categories based on narrow criteria. But the music master was looking for something that can't be measured, the spark of synthetic thinking, the ability to weave together art, science, philosophy, and mathematics into a unified understanding of existence. The selection process itself reveals something profound about how we nurture exceptional minds. Joseph wasn't pulled from his family through some brutal competition or cutthroat examination. Instead, the music master simply recognized that this particular child needed a different kind of education, one that would honor and develop his unique gifts rather than force him into a conventional mold. This raises a question that's incredibly relevant today. How many brilliant minds do we lose because our educational systems can't recognize or nurture unconventional intelligence? How many potential innovators, artists, or thinkers slip through the cracks because they don't fit standard patterns of achievement? Joseph's transition into Castalian education wasn't just about changing schools. It was about entering an entirely different way of being in the world. Imagine leaving behind everything familiar, your family, your neighborhood, your whole conception of what life could be, to enter a realm dedicated purely to intellectual and spiritual development. For a 12-year-old, this would be both terrifying and exhilarating. The early years of Joseph's Castalian education reveal something beautiful about how learning happens when it's not constrained by artificial boundaries. He studied mathematics not as isolated formulas, but as patterns that echoed in music. He learned history not as memorized dates, but as the unfolding story of human consciousness. Languages weren't just communication tools, but keys to different ways of understanding reality itself. What strikes me most about this period is how Joseph's education focused on developing what we might call meta-learning, the ability to learn how to learn, to see the underlying structures that connect all knowledge. In our age of information overload, this skill feels more crucial than ever. We're drowning in data but starving for wisdom, overwhelmed by facts but struggling to see meaningful patterns. The music master continued to play a crucial role throughout these formative years, serving not just as a teacher, but as what we might call a spiritual mentor. He embodied the highest ideals of Castalian culture, the pursuit of truth for its own sake, the integration of intellectual rigor with spiritual depth, and the cultivation of what Hesse calls reverence for the eternal. Now, you might be thinking this all sounds rather removed from our practical modern concerns. But consider this. In our rapidly changing world, where artificial intelligence can process information faster than any human, what becomes most valuable? It's precisely these qualities that Joseph was developing: the ability to synthesize, to see connections, to integrate knowledge across disciplines, and to maintain a sense of wonder and reverence in the face of complexity. Joseph's early years in Castalia also reveal something important about the relationship between individual development and community. He wasn't being trained to become an isolated genius, but to take his place within a tradition, to contribute to something larger than himself while still developing his unique gifts. As we watch young Joseph grow into his extraordinary education, we're really witnessing the cultivation of a particular kind of human being, one who represents what we might become if we took the development of consciousness as seriously as we take the development of technology. And that transformation is just beginning. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite coffee, and I'm about to tell you about one of the most fascinating educational journeys in all of literature. We're diving into Hermann Hesse's masterpiece, The Glass Bead Game, specifically exploring how young Joseph Knecht navigates his intellectual awakening in the mysterious province of Castalia. Now, think about this for a moment. When was the last time you felt truly intellectually alive? When learning felt less like work and more like discovering hidden treasures? Joseph Knecht's journey through Castalia isn't just about academic achievement. It's a profound exploration of what it means to dedicate your life to pure knowledge and intellectual beauty. Imagine a place where the brightest minds gather not to compete for grades or job prospects, but to pursue understanding for its own sake. Castalia represents Hesse's vision of an intellectual utopia, a province dedicated entirely to scholarship, meditation, and the cultivation of human consciousness. As Knecht moves through his education, we witness something remarkable happening. He's not just absorbing information like a sponge, he's learning to see connections everywhere. Think of it like this. Imagine your mind as a vast library, but instead of books sitting isolated on shelves, every piece of knowledge is connected by invisible threads of light. When you pull one thread, the whole web illuminates. This is what Hesse calls the Glass Bead Game, the ultimate intellectual exercise where mathematics, music, philosophy, and science dance together in perfect harmony. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for us modern folks. Knecht's education isn't about specialization, it's about integration. In our world of increasingly narrow expertise, where we're told to pick a lane and stay in it, Hesse presents a radical alternative. What if, instead of becoming experts in tiny slices of knowledge, we became masters of seeing how everything connects? Consider how Steve Jobs revolutionized technology not by being the best programmer or engineer, but by seeing connections between technology, design, and human experience that others missed. Knecht's intellectual adventures take him through various disciplines, but he approaches each one with what Buddhists might call beginner's mind. He studies mathematics not just to solve equations, but to understand the elegant patterns that govern reality. He explores music not just to play notes, but to hear the mathematical relationships that create harmony. Think about this. When you listen to your favorite song, you're experiencing the same mathematical ratios that the ancient Greeks discovered in their studies of cosmic harmony. One of the most compelling aspects of Knecht's journey is how he learns to balance intellectual rigor with spiritual depth. In Castalia, scholarship isn't cold and detached. It's a form of meditation, a way of touching something transcendent. This reminds me of how the great physicist Albert Einstein once said that the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. He wasn't just solving equations. He was having mystical experiences with the universe's hidden order. But here's something crucial that Hesse shows us through Knecht's story. Intellectual development without human connection becomes sterile. As Knecht progresses through his studies, he begins to sense that Castalia, for all its beauty, might be missing something essential. It's like having the most sophisticated smartphone in the world but no one to call. The knowledge is exquisite, but what's the point if it doesn't somehow serve life and human flourishing? This tension becomes central to Knecht's development. He excels at the Glass Bead Game, mastering its intricate rules and becoming capable of creating those beautiful, complex patterns of interconnected knowledge. Yet he starts to wonder, is this intellectual paradise perhaps too removed from the messy, complicated world where real people struggle with real problems? It's a question that resonates deeply in our current academic and tech cultures, where brilliant minds often work on problems that seem disconnected from everyday human needs. Knecht's education also teaches him about the importance of tradition and continuity. In Castalia, knowledge isn't treated as something to be consumed and discarded, but as a living stream that connects past, present, and future. Every student becomes both recipient and guardian of this intellectual heritage. Think about how different this is from our throwaway culture, where last year's smartphone is obsolete and last semester's textbook is worthless. The beauty of Knecht's intellectual journey lies in how it transforms him from a clever student into something more profound, a person capable of holding multiple perspectives simultaneously, someone who can see both the forest and the trees. He develops what we might call intellectual humility, understanding that the more he learns, the more mysterious and wonderful the world becomes. As we follow Knecht through these formative years, we're really watching someone learn how to think rather than what to think. He's developing the capacity for what Hesse calls awakeness, a quality of attention that can find the sacred in the ordinary and see the patterns that connect all things. This brings us to a crucial realization that will shape everything that follows in Knecht's story. True education isn't about accumulating facts or even mastering skills. It's about developing the wisdom to know how knowledge should serve life, not the other way around. And that wisdom, as we'll discover, will eventually lead Knecht to make choices that surprise everyone, including himself. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite coffee, and I'm about to tell you about one of the most fascinating character transformations in literature. We've been following Joseph Knecht through his journey in Hesse's masterpiece, and now we reach the pinnacle moment where our thoughtful scholar becomes something extraordinary, the Magister Ludi, the master of the Glass Bead Game itself. Now, think about this for a moment. How many times in your own life have you found yourself suddenly thrust into a position of responsibility you never quite expected? Maybe you became a team leader at work, or found yourself the go-to person in your family during a crisis. That feeling of, how did I get here, mixed with, am I ready for this? That's exactly where we find Knecht as he ascends to the highest intellectual position in Castalia. But here's what makes Knecht's rise so compelling. It's not a story of ambition fulfilled. Hesse paints us a portrait of someone who becomes a master almost reluctantly, through a combination of deep understanding and genuine service to something greater than himself. When the previous Magister Ludi passes away, the selection committee doesn't choose the most politically savvy candidate or the one who campaigned hardest for the position. They choose Knecht because he embodies something rare, authentic wisdom coupled with humility. Think about today's leadership landscape for a minute. We're surrounded by people climbing corporate ladders, influencers building personal brands, politicians maneuvering for power. But Knecht represents something different entirely. Leadership that emerges from depth rather than ambition. He reminds me of those quiet managers who somehow make everything work better, or the teachers who transform entire schools not through grand gestures but through consistent, thoughtful presence. The Glass Bead Game itself becomes a perfect metaphor here. Imagine trying to explain quantum physics through interpretive dance, or capturing the essence of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony using only mathematical equations. The game is this incredible intellectual synthesis that connects art, science, philosophy, and mathematics into a unified whole. It's like having a conversation where literature flows seamlessly into physics, where musical harmony explains cosmic order, where every discipline illuminates every other. As master of the game, Knecht isn't just an administrator. He becomes the living embodiment of intellectual integration. Now, doesn't this sound familiar in our age of specialization? We live in a world where experts know more and more about less and less. We have brilliant computer scientists who can't appreciate poetry, gifted artists who flee from anything mathematical, economists who ignore psychology. Knecht represents the antithesis of this fragmentation. Here's where Hesse's insight becomes almost prophetic. Through Knecht's mastery, we see what happens when someone refuses to stay in their lane, when they insist on seeing connections across boundaries. It's like watching someone conduct an orchestra where the violins represent quantum mechanics, the cellos embody Renaissance art, and the percussion section captures the rhythms of ancient philosophy. And somehow, it all creates beautiful music. But let me tell you what's really fascinating about Knecht's leadership style. He doesn't rule through authority or intimidation. Instead, he leads through what we might call pedagogical presence. Every interaction becomes a teaching moment, not in a preachy way, but through genuine curiosity and engagement. He reminds me of those rare individuals who make you feel smarter just by being around them, not because they show off their knowledge, but because they ask questions that help you discover insights you didn't know you had. The ceremonies and rituals of the Glass Bead Game under Knecht's guidance become almost sacred performances. Picture attending a concert where the music isn't just beautiful sound, but a living demonstration of how mathematical principles dance with artistic expression, how scientific discoveries harmonize with spiritual insights. These aren't dry academic exercises, they're celebrations of human intellectual achievement. Now think about this. In our digital age, we're drowning in information but starving for wisdom. We have access to more knowledge than any generation in history, yet we often feel more fragmented and confused than ever. Knecht's approach to the game suggests a different path, not just accumulating facts, but weaving them into meaningful patterns, finding the underlying harmonies that connect seemingly disparate fields. What strikes me most about Knecht's tenure as Magister Ludi is how he transforms the role itself. Previous masters might have been guardians of tradition, but Knecht becomes something more dynamic, a living bridge between the eternal and the contemporary, between pure intellect and human experience. He's like a jazz musician who honors the classical forms while improvising something entirely new. The beauty of this section lies in how Hesse shows us that true mastery isn't about domination or control, it's about service to something transcendent. Knecht doesn't possess the game, he serves it. He doesn't use his position for personal gain, he becomes a vessel through which the deepest human insights can flow and find expression. As we watch Knecht settle into his role as master, we're witnessing something profound about the nature of leadership itself. How the greatest leaders are often those who lead not because they sought power, but because they embodied the values and vision their communities needed most. And this brings us to a crucial turning point in our story, because even as Knecht reaches the pinnacle of success in Castalia, seeds of restlessness are already beginning to sprout in his mind. So we've been journeying through Joseph Knecht's extraordinary life in Castalia, watching him rise to become the Magister Ludi, the master of the Glass Bead Game itself. But now, dear friend, we come to something truly fascinating that Hesse weaves into this tapestry. Picture this. You're sitting with your coffee, maybe it's late evening, and you start wondering about all the different lives you could have lived. What if you'd taken that job in another city? What if you'd studied something completely different? What if you'd been born in a different century altogether? Well, Joseph Knecht does exactly this kind of reflection, but in the most extraordinary way imaginable. He writes what he calls his 3 lives, fictional autobiographies of himself living in completely different eras and circumstances. Now, think about this for a moment. Here's a man who has dedicated his entire existence to the pursuit of pure intellect and spiritual games, and yet he's compelled to imagine himself as a rainmaker in prehistoric times, a Christian hermit in the early centuries after Christ, and a musician in the 18th century. Why would someone do this? The first life Knecht imagines is perhaps the most primal and visceral. He sees himself as Knecht the rainmaker, living in a Stone Age tribe where survival depends not on abstract intellectual games, but on understanding the rhythms of nature, the needs of the community, and the delicate balance between the spiritual and the practical. Picture this ancient figure, standing before his tribe during a devastating drought, feeling the weight of their desperate hopes pressing down on his shoulders. He must somehow bridge the gap between the seen and unseen worlds, between human need and natural forces. What strikes me as so powerful about this vision is how it strips away all the sophisticated layers of Castalian culture and gets to something fundamental about human purpose. The rainmaker serves his community not through intellectual prowess, but through a deep, almost mystical connection to the world around him. He's a mediator, just as the Glass Bead Game master is, but his medium is rain and wind, and the collective unconscious of his people, rather than abstract symbols and mathematical relationships. Now, doesn't this remind you of certain people in our modern world? Think about those individuals who seem to have an uncanny ability to sense what a group needs, who can read the emotional weather of a room, and somehow help bring about the change that everyone is hoping for. Maybe it's a therapist who helps a family through crisis, or a community organizer who channels collective frustration into positive action, or even a coach who knows exactly when to push and when to encourage. They're modern rainmakers in their own way. The second life takes us into early Christian times, where Knecht imagines himself as a hermit and confessor named Josephus. This version of himself has retreated from the world not to pursue intellectual games, but to wrestle with questions of faith, sin, and redemption. He lives in a cave, practices severe self-discipline, and becomes known for his ability to help others find spiritual peace through confession and guidance. What's fascinating here is how this hermit's life mirrors, and yet completely contrasts with the Castalian existence. Both involve withdrawal from ordinary worldly concerns, both require intense discipline and study, both serve others in a spiritual capacity. But where the Glass Bead Game master works with pure abstraction and intellectual synthesis, the hermit works with the messy, painful, deeply personal struggles of individual souls. One deals with the mathematics of meaning, the other with the raw human experience of guilt, forgiveness, and transformation. Can you see the parallel to our contemporary world? Think about the people who dedicate their lives to one-on-one healing work, whether they're counselors, spiritual directors, or even those friends who somehow always become the person everyone turns to in crisis. They're creating sacred space for human transformation, just as Josephus did in his cave. The third life brings us to 18th century music, where Knecht sees himself as a composer and music teacher in the world of Bach and Handel. This incarnation is perhaps the most poignant, because it shows someone trying to balance artistic creation with practical survival, pursuing beauty while also needing to eat and pay rent. This musical Knecht struggles with the tension between pure artistic vision and the demands of patrons, students, and daily life. Here we see something that speaks directly to every creative person listening to this right now. How do you maintain artistic integrity while also making a living? How do you serve the muse while also serving your family's needs? This version of Knecht faces the eternal dilemma of the artist in society, wanting to create something transcendent while also being very much a person with human needs and limitations. What Hesse is showing us through these three lives is that the human impulse to serve, to connect the spiritual with the practical, to help others find meaning and transformation, can express itself in radically different ways depending on the historical moment and cultural context. The rainmaker, the hermit, and the musician are all essentially doing the same work that the Magister Ludi does, but their tools and circumstances are completely different. Now, as we prepare to see how Knecht's actual life concludes, these imagined lives take on even deeper significance. They're not just intellectual exercises or creative writing experiments. They're Knecht's way of exploring the eternal questions that his real life in Castalia both illuminates and perhaps, in some ways, fails to fully answer. So here we are, settling into perhaps the most pivotal moment in Joseph Knecht's journey, and honestly, it's a moment that might feel surprisingly familiar to anyone who's ever found themselves questioning the very foundation of their life's work. Picture this. You're at the absolute pinnacle of your profession, respected by everyone around you, living what others would consider the perfect life, and yet something deep inside you whispers that maybe, just maybe, you're missing something essential. Knecht's discontent doesn't arrive like a thunderbolt. No, it creeps in quietly, the way doubt often does in our own lives. Think about those moments when you're lying awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the path you've chosen is really taking you where you need to go. That's exactly what's happening to our protagonist, except his 3 a.m. moment stretches across months, maybe years, as he begins to see cracks in what once seemed like the perfect intellectual paradise. Now, here's where Hesse's genius really shines through. Knecht isn't rebelling against Castalia because it's corrupt or evil. Quite the opposite. He's questioning it precisely because it's too perfect, too removed from the messy, complicated reality of human existence. It's like being trapped in the most beautiful museum in the world, and suddenly realizing that while you're surrounded by incredible art, you haven't felt the rain on your skin in years. The glass bead game itself becomes a symbol of this tension. Think about it this way. Imagine if you spent your entire life becoming a master of the most sophisticated, intellectually demanding game ever created, something so complex and beautiful that only a handful of people in the world could even understand it. You'd be proud, right? You'd feel accomplished. But what if, one day, you looked around and realized that while you were perfecting this incredible skill, the world outside was struggling with war, poverty, suffering, and you had nothing to offer them except your expertise in something they couldn't even comprehend? This is Knecht's dilemma, and it's surprisingly modern when you think about it. How many of us work in industries or pursue goals that feel increasingly disconnected from what really matters? We live in an age where people can become incredibly specialized, incredibly successful within their narrow fields, while feeling completely useless when it comes to addressing the broader challenges facing humanity. Knecht's story speaks directly to that sense of purposeful purposelessness that haunts so many of us today. What makes his internal struggle even more compelling is that he's not angry or bitter. He's genuinely grateful for everything Castalia has given him. It's taught him discipline, intellectual rigor, the ability to see patterns and connections that others miss. But gratitude and fulfillment aren't the same thing, are they? You can appreciate your education while questioning whether it's prepared you for the life you actually want to live. Hesse gives us these beautiful moments where Knecht finds himself drawn to the most basic human experiences. He watches ordinary people going about their daily lives and feels a longing he can't quite name. It's like being fluent in 12 languages, but suddenly realizing you've forgotten how to have a simple conversation with a child. The sophistication that once felt like freedom begins to feel like a prison of its own making. Now, think about this for a moment. When was the last time you felt truly useful? Not professionally successful, not intellectually stimulated, but genuinely useful to another human being in a way that mattered. Knecht's growing awareness that his vast knowledge serves primarily to perpetuate an institution, rather than help real people, creates a crisis that goes to the heart of what it means to live a meaningful life. The philosophical weight of his position as Magister Ludi adds another layer to his discontent. He's not just a player of the glass bead game, he's its ultimate authority, responsible for maintaining and developing this incredible intellectual tradition. But authority without connection to life's struggles starts to feel hollow. It's like being crowned king of an island where you're the only inhabitant. What's particularly fascinating about Knecht's internal journey is how it mirrors the broader tension between contemplation and action that has puzzled philosophers for centuries. Should we retreat from the world to pursue pure knowledge and understanding, or should we engage directly with life's challenges, even if it means accepting messiness and imperfection? Knecht is discovering that this isn't really a choice you make once, but a question you have to keep answering as you grow and change. His discontent isn't a rejection of learning or intellectual pursuit. Rather, it's a mature recognition that knowledge without application, wisdom without compassion, and understanding without engagement might be beautiful, but they're also incomplete. He's beginning to sense that true mastery might require not just understanding the game, but knowing when to stop playing it. As we watch Knecht grapple with these questions, we're really watching someone wrestle with one of the most fundamental challenges of human existence. How do we balance the need for depth and expertise with the equally important need for breadth and connection? His journey toward this realization sets the stage for decisions that will transform not just his own life, but challenge everything Castalia represents about the relationship between knowledge and living. Picture this. You're sitting at your desk, staring at a blank piece of paper, knowing you need to write the most important letter of your life. That's exactly where Joseph Knecht finds himself in this pivotal moment of Hesse's masterpiece. The letter he's about to write to his old friend Plinio Designori isn't just correspondence. It's a manifesto, a confession, and a bridge between two worlds that seem impossible to reconcile. Now think about this for a moment. Have you ever found yourself at a crossroads where everything you've believed, everything you've worked for, suddenly feels incomplete? That's precisely where Knecht stands. He's the Magister Ludi, the master of the Glass Bead Game, sitting at the pinnacle of Castalia's intellectual hierarchy. Yet something is gnawing at him, something that makes him pick up his pen and bare his soul to the one person who might understand his growing unease. The letter begins with warmth, the kind of genuine affection that can only exist between friends who have walked different paths but never lost sight of each other. Knecht acknowledges the years that have passed since their student days, when Plinio challenged the very foundations of Castalian thinking. Remember how Designori was the outsider, the worldly voice questioning whether pure intellectual pursuit was enough. Well, now the tables have turned in the most fascinating way. Knecht opens his heart about what he calls his awakening. Imagine spending your entire adult life in a beautiful monastery of the mind, surrounded by the most elegant ideas humanity has ever produced, only to realize you might be living in a gilded cage. That's the metaphor Hesse gives us through Knecht's words. The Glass Bead Game, for all its sublime beauty and intellectual rigor, has become something troubling to him, a magnificent escape from the messy, urgent realities of human existence. Here's where it gets really interesting. Knecht doesn't reject Castalia outright. Think of it like someone who spent years perfecting their technique in a beautiful art form, only to realize they've never actually connected with a real audience. He still loves the game, still recognizes its profound value, but he's beginning to see it as incomplete. It's like being a master chef who's only ever cooked for other master chefs, technically perfect, but somehow missing the point of nourishment. The heart of the letter reveals Knecht's growing conviction that Castalia has become dangerously isolated. Picture a research university that's become so focused on pure theory that it's forgotten the world outside its walls. Sound familiar? In our modern context, think about how tech companies can become so absorbed in elegant code that they lose sight of how their products affect real people's lives. Knecht is essentially saying that intellectual beauty without human connection becomes sterile, even harmful. But here's what makes this letter so powerful. Knecht isn't writing as a disillusioned dropout. He's writing as someone who's mastered the system and found it wanting. When he tells Designori about his growing desire to teach, to engage with the world beyond Castalia's borders, he's not rejecting knowledge. He's arguing for knowledge that serves humanity rather than existing for its own sake. The most moving part of the letter comes when Knecht reflects on what he calls the awakening conscience. Think about those moments in your own life when you've suddenly seen your comfortable routines from the outside, when you've asked yourself whether you're actually making a difference or just going through beautiful, meaningless motions. That's the existential crisis Knecht is sharing with his friend. He's realized that Castalia, for all its magnificence, might be a form of intellectual masturbation, impressive to practitioners but irrelevant to the world's real needs. Now, consider how relevant this feels in our current moment. We live in an age of incredible specialization, where experts in narrow fields can spend entire careers speaking only to other experts. Academic papers that no one reads, conferences where brilliant minds gather to discuss theories that never touch ordinary lives. Knecht's critique feels startlingly contemporary. He's essentially arguing that knowledge without service becomes a luxury that society can't afford. What's particularly beautiful about this letter is how Knecht frames his awakening not as a rejection of his past, but as its natural evolution. It's like a musician who's mastered classical technique finally feeling ready to improvise, or a scholar who's absorbed all the books finally wanting to write their own. He sees his potential departure from Castalia not as abandonment, but as graduation to a more challenging and necessary form of service. The letter concludes with Knecht essentially asking Designori to help him understand the world beyond Castalia's walls. Remember, Plinio has been living in that world all along, managing businesses, raising a family, dealing with practical politics and social problems. Knecht is humble enough to recognize that his friend possesses knowledge he desperately needs. The wisdom of engagement, the understanding of how ideas translate into action, the messy but vital art of living fully in the world. As we turn the page from this pivotal letter, we see Knecht standing at the threshold of transformation. He's about to discover whether the beautiful theories of Castalia can survive contact with the chaotic, urgent, magnificently imperfect world beyond its gates. The letter to Designori isn't just correspondence. It's a declaration of intent to bridge the gap between wisdom and service, between contemplation and action. Picture this. You're sitting in the most beautiful ivory tower imaginable, surrounded by brilliant minds, endless books, and the purest intellectual pursuits known to humanity. Everything you could ever want for a life of the mind is right at your fingertips. Now imagine walking away from all of that. This is exactly what Joseph Knecht does in one of the most pivotal moments of Hermann Hesse's masterpiece, and honestly, it's a decision that speaks to something deep in all of us. Knecht's choice to leave Castalia isn't some sudden rebellion or midlife crisis. Think about this for a moment. Here's a man who has reached the absolute pinnacle of his world. He's the Magister Ludi, the master of the Glass Bead Game, essentially the intellectual emperor of this scholarly paradise. Yet something is gnawing at him, something that all the abstract beauty of pure thought cannot satisfy. It's like being the world's greatest chess player, but suddenly realizing you've never actually lived in the world the game is supposed to represent. You know that feeling when you've been in a job or a relationship, or even just a routine for so long that you start to feel like you're sleepwalking through life. That's what's happening to Knecht, but on a much more profound level. Castalia, for all its intellectual magnificence, has become a kind of beautiful prison. The scholars there have created such perfect isolation from the messy, complicated world outside that they've lost touch with what it means to be truly human. Now, think about this in terms of our modern world. How many of us live in our own versions of Castalia? Maybe it's the tech bubble in Silicon Valley, where brilliant minds solve fascinating problems while remaining completely disconnected from how their solutions affect real people. Or consider academia today. How many professors spend their entire careers writing papers that only 12 other people will ever read, contributing to human knowledge in ways that somehow never quite touch actual human lives? Knecht's awakening comes through his relationships with people outside Castalia, particularly his friendship with Designori, a former Castalian who chose to live in the real world. Through these connections, Knecht begins to see that Castalia's pursuit of pure knowledge has become sterile, like a garden so carefully tended that nothing wild or surprising can grow there anymore. It's the difference between studying the theory of swimming and actually jumping into the ocean. The decision to leave isn't easy. Imagine giving up tenure at the most prestigious university in the world to become a high school teacher. That's essentially what Knecht is doing. He's trading the rarefied air of abstract perfection for the messy, unpredictable world of real human relationships and immediate, practical concerns. His friends and colleagues think he's lost his mind. After all, why would anyone choose the chaos of ordinary life over the serene beauty of pure intellect? But here's where Hesse's insight becomes brilliant and deeply relevant to our times. Knecht realizes that knowledge without service, wisdom without application, and intellect without compassion are ultimately empty. It's like having the most sophisticated GPS system in the world but never actually going anywhere. The glass bead game, for all its elegance, has become an end in itself rather than a means to understanding and improving human existence. Think about the tech entrepreneurs who leave lucrative careers to teach in underserved communities, or the lawyers who abandon high-paying firms to do public interest work. They're making their own version of Knecht's choice, trading security and prestige for meaning and direct human impact. There's something in the human spirit that eventually rebels against pure abstraction, no matter how beautiful or rewarding it might be. What makes Knecht's decision even more poignant is that he's not rejecting Castalia out of bitterness or failure. He loves the place and recognizes its value, but he's come to understand that even the most perfect system can become a trap if it separates us from the full experience of being human. It's like living your entire life in a museum, surrounded by beauty and culture, but missing the raw, unpredictable vitality of the street outside. The modern parallel that strikes me most powerfully is our relationship with digital technology. We've created our own Castalias, virtual worlds of infinite information and connection that can become substitutes for real-world engagement. How many of us know more about online communities than our actual neighbors? How many brilliant minds are solving abstract problems in the digital realm, while real-world challenges like climate change, inequality, and human suffering cry out for attention? Knecht's choice represents a fundamental question that every thoughtful person must eventually face. Is the pursuit of perfection worth the cost of isolation from imperfection? His answer is a resounding no. He chooses to step into the world not because Castalia is bad, but because life, real, messy, complicated, beautiful life, is calling him to something larger than even the most perfect intellectual paradise. As we move forward in exploring this profound decision, we'll see how Knecht's leap into the unknown world outside Castalia becomes both a personal journey of discovery and a powerful statement about what it means to live a truly meaningful life. His choice challenges us all to examine our own ivory towers and ask ourselves, what are we missing while we pursue our own versions of perfection? Picture yourself sitting across from someone who has dedicated their entire life to mastering something beautiful and complex, only to discover that mastery itself might be a kind of prison. That's exactly where we find Joseph Knecht as we approach the climax of Hermann Hesse's masterpiece, and honestly, it's a moment that will make you question everything you think you know about success and purpose. Knecht's final game isn't just any ordinary glass bead game. This is the culmination of decades spent perfecting an art form that represents the highest intellectual achievement of his civilization. Think about the most complex, beautiful thing you've ever witnessed someone create, whether it's a master chef orchestrating a perfect meal or a conductor leading a symphony. Now multiply that by 10, and you're getting close to what Knecht has achieved. The glass bead game, as Hesse envisions it, is this incredible synthesis of mathematics, music, philosophy, and pure creative expression, all woven together into something that transcends any single discipline. But here's where it gets fascinating, and frankly, a little heartbreaking. As Knecht prepares for what he knows will be his final performance as Magister Ludi, he's not thinking about glory or recognition. Instead, he's wrestling with a profound realization that many of us face in our own lives, usually much later than we'd like. He's discovered that perfection, when it becomes an end in itself, can actually cut us off from the very life it was supposed to enhance. Now, think about this for a moment. How many times have you seen someone become so good at something that they lose touch with why they started doing it in the first place? Maybe it's the brilliant surgeon who can perform any operation but has forgotten how to connect with patients, or the successful entrepreneur who built an empire but lost their family along the way. Knecht finds himself in a similar position, realizing that the Glass Bead Game, for all its beauty and intellectual rigor, has become a kind of ivory tower that separates its practitioners from the messy, complicated, absolutely essential business of actually living. The game itself, when Knecht finally plays it, is described in terms that make it sound almost mystical. Imagine watching someone weave together musical themes with mathematical proofs, philosophical arguments with artistic expressions, creating patterns so intricate and meaningful that they seem to capture something fundamental about the nature of existence itself. Hesse's description makes you feel like you're witnessing something sacred, a kind of intellectual prayer that connects the player to the deepest currents of human understanding. Yet even as Knecht demonstrates his absolute mastery, creating what might be the most perfect game ever played, he's simultaneously announcing his departure from this world he's dominated for so long. It's like watching someone paint their masterpiece while explaining why they're putting down the brush forever. The paradox is almost unbearable, and it speaks to something we all grapple with in our own ways. What makes this moment so powerful is how Knecht's decision reflects a deeper understanding about the relationship between knowledge and wisdom, between achievement and fulfillment. He's not rejecting the Glass Bead Game because it's worthless, quite the opposite. He's leaving because he's finally understood that even the most beautiful intellectual pursuit can become a form of spiritual stagnation if it's pursued in isolation from the broader human experience. This resonates so strongly with our contemporary world, doesn't it? We live in an age of incredible specialization, where people can spend their entire careers becoming experts in increasingly narrow fields. We have data scientists who can predict consumer behavior with stunning accuracy, but struggle to have meaningful conversations with their own children. We have academics who can decode the mysteries of ancient civilizations, but feel completely lost when it comes to navigating modern relationships. Knecht's final game becomes a kind of farewell letter to a way of life that he's outgrown. As he plays, creating these impossibly beautiful patterns of meaning, he's also demonstrating why he must leave them behind. It's as if he's saying, "Look, I can do this perfectly, but perfection isn't the point. Connection is. Service is. Actually helping real people with real problems is." The audience watching this final performance doesn't fully understand what they're witnessing. They see technical brilliance, artistic beauty, intellectual achievement at its highest level, but they miss the deeper message that Knecht is trying to communicate through the very structure of his game. He's creating a work of art that argues for its own limitations, a perfect expression of why perfection itself might not be the ultimate goal. As the game concludes and Knecht steps down from his position as Magister Ludi, we're left with this incredible moment of transition. He's not abandoning everything he's learned or achieved. Instead, he's choosing to take all of that wisdom and apply it in a completely different context, working directly with young people, engaging with the messy realities of education and human development rather than the refined abstractions of the game. This brings us to the threshold of Knecht's final transformation, where all of his intellectual achievements will be tested against the ultimate challenge. Can profound wisdom actually make a difference in the real world? It's a question that follows him into the mountains, toward his last and most important lesson about what it truly means to serve others. You know, there's something almost magical about discovering someone's poetry after you've come to know them through their other works. It's like finding a secret diary, isn't it? In Hermann Hesse's The Glass Bead Game, we get exactly this kind of intimate glimpse into Joseph Knecht's inner world through his poems. These aren't just literary exercises or academic footnotes. They're windows into the soul of a man grappling with the deepest questions of existence, duty, and meaning. Picture this. You're cleaning out your late grandfather's study, and tucked away in a drawer, you find a collection of his handwritten poems. Suddenly, this person you thought you knew reveals entirely new depths. That's precisely what happens when we encounter Knecht's poetry in Hesse's masterpiece. These verses serve as a counterpoint to the intellectual rigor of the Glass Bead Game itself, showing us that even the most disciplined mind needs space for wonder, doubt, and emotional expression. The poems reveal Knecht at his most vulnerable and searching. While the Glass Bead Game represents the pinnacle of intellectual achievement in Castalia, this almost perfect synthesis of all human knowledge, the poetry shows us a man who understands that pure intellect alone cannot capture the fullness of human experience. Think about the most brilliant person you know. They might solve complex problems with ease, but can they articulate the feeling of watching a sunset or the ache of missing someone they love? Knecht's poems suggest that true wisdom requires both the mind and the heart working in harmony. One of the most striking aspects of these poems is how they wrestle with the tension between withdrawal from the world and engagement with it. Castalia, remember, is essentially an ivory tower, a place where the intellectual elite retreat to pursue pure knowledge, free from the messy complications of ordinary life. But Knecht's poetry reveals his growing awareness that this separation might come at too high a cost. It's like being a master chef who's never actually tasted the food served in a real restaurant, only studied recipes in pristine cookbooks. Consider how relevant this struggle feels today. We live in an age of incredible specialization, where experts in narrow fields can become completely disconnected from the broader human experience. Think about the tech entrepreneur who can revolutionize communication, but struggles to have a meaningful conversation with their own family. Or the academic who writes brilliant papers about social justice, but has never spent time in the communities they're supposedly helping. Knecht's poems capture this modern dilemma with startling prescience. The poetry also explores themes of service and sacrifice in ways that feel deeply personal rather than abstract. When Knecht writes about duty, he's not delivering a lecture on ethics. He's wrestling with the very real question of how to live a meaningful life. Should he remain in Castalia, perfecting the Glass Bead Game and serving as an inspiration to future generations of scholars? Or should he venture into the ordinary world, where his knowledge might have more immediate but perhaps less lasting impact? This reminds me of a conversation I once had with a doctor who specialized in rare diseases. She told me about the constant tension she felt between staying in her research lab, where she might discover treatments that could help thousands of future patients, and working directly with the handful of current patients who needed her expertise right now. There's no easy answer to such dilemmas, and Knecht's poems don't pretend to offer one. Instead, they invite us to sit with the complexity and find meaning in the struggle itself. What's particularly beautiful about these poems is how they demonstrate that questioning doesn't diminish devotion, it deepens it. Knecht isn't rejecting the values of Castalia or the importance of the Glass Bead Game. Rather, he's asking whether these pursuits are serving their highest purpose. It's like a devoted parent questioning whether their protective instincts are actually helping or hindering their child's growth. The love remains constant, but the expression of that love evolves. Now think about this. In our own lives, how often do we mistake loyalty for mindless adherence to tradition? Knecht's poetry suggests that true loyalty sometimes requires the courage to ask difficult questions. Whether we're talking about our careers, our relationships, or our beliefs, growth often demands that we examine our assumptions with fresh eyes. The poems also reveal Knecht's deep appreciation for the interconnectedness of all knowledge and experience. This isn't just intellectual understanding, it's felt knowledge, the kind that comes from years of contemplation and practice. When he writes about the relationship between music and mathematics, or between history and human nature, he's not showing off his erudition. He's sharing insights that have become part of his very being. As we transition from exploring Knecht's inner world through his poetry to understanding his ultimate choices in life, we carry with us this sense of a complete human being, someone who honors both reason and intuition, tradition and innovation, solitude and community. The poems don't resolve the tensions in Knecht's life. They illuminate them with such clarity that we begin to see our own struggles reflected in his words. And perhaps that's the greatest gift any poet can offer, not answers, but better questions, and the courage to keep asking them. So we've followed Joseph Knecht through his remarkable journey from student to Magister Ludi, and now we come to something truly fascinating in Hesse's masterpiece. After Knecht's death, his colleagues discover a treasure trove of writings he never published during his lifetime. Think about this for a moment. Here's a man who spent his entire adult life in service to an institution, yet privately, he was wrestling with questions that would challenge everything that institution stood for. These posthumous writings are like finding a secret diary of someone you thought you knew completely, only to discover they'd been having an entirely different conversation with themselves all along. Hesse presents us with 3 fictional biographies that Knecht wrote, each set in a different historical period, each exploring what it means to live a meaningful life when the world around you is changing faster than you can comprehend. The first story takes us to a rainmaker in prehistoric times. Now, you might wonder why Hesse would have his intellectual protagonist write about such a primitive figure, but here's where it gets beautiful. This rainmaker represents pure service. He doesn't question whether his rituals actually bring rain. He simply serves his community's needs with complete dedication. There's something profoundly moving about this character's absolute faith in his role. In our modern world of constant doubt and analysis, when we're always questioning whether our work has meaning, whether we're making a real difference, this prehistoric figure offers us a glimpse of what unquestioning service looks like. But here's what's really striking. Even this simple rainmaker faces a crisis. When his methods fail repeatedly, when the rains don't come despite his best efforts, he must confront the possibility that everything he believed about his purpose might be wrong. Sound familiar? How many of us have felt that way about our careers, our relationships, our life choices? The rainmaker's struggle mirrors our own modern anxieties about purpose and effectiveness, just stripped of all our contemporary complications. The second biography jumps forward to early Christian times, following a hermit named Josephus. This isn't just any hermit, he's a man who's chosen radical withdrawal from the world in pursuit of spiritual truth. Think about this in our hyperconnected age, when we can barely go 5 minutes without checking our phones. Josephus represents the opposite extreme complete disconnection in service of inner development, but Hesse doesn't romanticize this choice. Instead, he shows us a man struggling with doubt, loneliness, and the constant question of whether his withdrawal serves any purpose beyond his own spiritual comfort. What's fascinating is how Josephus grapples with the tension between personal spiritual development and service to others. He's achieved a kind of inner peace through his practices, but he's constantly questioning whether this achievement means anything if it doesn't somehow benefit the world. This tension feels incredibly relevant today, doesn't it? We're living in an age of self-help and personal development, where meditation apps and mindfulness practices promise inner peace, but we're also increasingly aware that purely individual solutions might not be enough for the collective challenges we face. The third biography brings us to an 18th century music teacher named Joseph, and this one hits closest to home for understanding Knecht's own struggles. Joseph is caught between 2 worlds, the aristocratic culture that employs him and the emerging democratic ideals that are reshaping society. He's a servant to beauty and tradition, but he's also witnessing the birth of a new world that might have no place for what he represents. Picture this Joseph teaching music to aristocratic children while revolution brews in the streets outside. He's preserving something beautiful and valuable, the musical traditions of his time, But he's also increasingly aware that this beauty might be irrelevant to the suffering and change happening around him. This is Knecht's own dilemma in disguise, isn't it? How do you maintain dedication to abstract intellectual beauty when the world is crying out for practical solutions to real problems? What makes these biographical sketches so powerful is how they illuminate the eternal human struggle between different types of service. The rainmaker serves through action and ritual, the hermit through withdrawal and contemplation, the music teacher through preservation and transmission of beauty. Each represents a valid response to the question of how to live meaningfully, yet each also faces the limitation of their chosen path. Now, think about this: Knecht wrote these stories while he was still fully committed to his role as Magister Ludi, while he was still the ultimate insider in Castalia's intellectual paradise. These weren't the writings of a rebel or a dropout. They were the private meditations of a man trying to understand the deeper currents of his own choices. They reveal someone who was simultaneously living one path while imaginatively exploring alternatives. The genius of including these posthumous writings in the novel is how they reframe everything we've just experienced with Knecht. They show us that his eventual departure from Castalia wasn't a sudden rebellion, but the culmination of a long, thoughtful process of questioning. They also suggest that the tension between contemplation and action, between preserving beauty and addressing immediate needs, isn't something to be resolved once and for all, but rather something to be lived with, wrestled with, throughout a meaningful life. As we prepare to close our exploration of this remarkable novel, these writings remind us that the most profound questions don't have simple answers. Instead, they invite us into an ongoing conversation with ourselves about what it means to serve, to create meaning, and to live authentically in whatever world we find ourselves inhabiting. Picture yourself sitting in a quiet library at dusk, watching the last rays of sunlight filter through tall windows onto ancient manuscripts. This is where we find ourselves as we explore perhaps the most profound question Hermann Hesse poses in the Glass Bead Game. What happens when a brilliant intellectual system becomes so perfect, so refined, that it loses touch with the messy, beautiful reality of human life? The legacy of the Glass Bead Game isn't just about an imaginary intellectual exercise from a fictional future. It's about something we're living through right now, in our age of algorithms, artificial intelligence, and increasingly abstract digital realities. Think about this for a moment. How often do you find yourself so absorbed in the perfected world of your smartphone, your social media feeds, your carefully curated digital existence, that you forget to look up and notice the actual world around you? Hesse shows us through Joseph Knecht's journey that the game, for all its beauty and intellectual sophistication, carries within it the seeds of its own limitation. The game represents the ultimate achievement of human intellectual synthesis. Imagine being able to connect mathematics with music, philosophy with physics, art with science, all in one elegant, playable system. It's like having the ability to see the hidden patterns that connect everything in the universe. Sounds incredible, right? And it is. But here's the catch that Hesse so brilliantly illuminates. This very perfection becomes a kind of prison. Consider how this plays out in our own world. We've created incredible systems of knowledge and technology. Our universities have become more specialized, our experts more expert, our algorithms more sophisticated. We can predict consumer behavior, model climate patterns, and even generate art through artificial intelligence. But somewhere in this pursuit of intellectual perfection, we've started to lose something essentially human: the ability to live fully in the present moment, to engage with the unpredictable messiness of real relationships, real communities, real problems that can't be solved by abstract thinking alone. Joseph Knecht's ultimate decision to leave Castalia, the ivory tower where the game is played, represents one of literature's most powerful statements about the relationship between knowledge and life. Now, think about this. Here's a man who has reached the absolute pinnacle of intellectual achievement, who has mastered the most sophisticated system of thought ever created, and he chooses to walk away. Why? Because he realizes that true wisdom isn't about perfecting abstract systems. It's about engaging with the world as it actually is, in all its imperfection and unpredictability. This reminds me of a story about Einstein, who, despite being one of history's greatest abstract thinkers, was known for taking long walks, playing the violin, and engaging deeply with the political and social issues of his time. He understood intuitively what Knecht discovers through painful experience: that intellectual brilliance divorced from human engagement becomes sterile, even dangerous. The game's legacy, as Hesse presents it, is both magnificent and tragic. It represents humanity's highest intellectual aspirations, our desire to find unity, pattern, and meaning in the chaos of existence. But it also shows us what happens when we mistake the map for the territory, when we become so enamored with our systems of understanding that we forget they're meant to serve life, not replace it. In our current era, we're living through our own version of this dilemma. We have access to more information than any generation in human history. We can connect with people across the globe instantly. We can simulate entire worlds in virtual reality. We're developing artificial intelligence that can compose symphonies and write poetry. And yet, rates of depression, anxiety, and social isolation continue to climb. We're more connected and more lonely than ever before. Sound familiar? The enduring impact of the Glass Bead Game on civilization, as Hesse envisions it, is precisely this tension between transcendence and engagement. The game teaches us that the highest human achievements, whether in art, science, philosophy, or technology, are meaningless unless they somehow serve to enhance our capacity for love, understanding, and genuine human connection. Think about the teachers, mentors, or thinkers who have most influenced your life. Chances are, they weren't just brilliant in their field. They were people who could translate their knowledge into wisdom that helped you live better, love more deeply, or understand yourself and others more clearly. This is the kind of legacy that truly matters, the kind that Knecht ultimately chooses when he leaves the game behind. The profound irony that Hesse reveals is that the game, created to synthesize all human knowledge into one beautiful system, ultimately teaches its greatest practitioner that synthesis isn't enough. Life demands not just understanding but participation, not just observation but action, not just perfection but the willingness to be imperfect in service of something larger than ourselves. As we navigate our own age of artificial intelligence and virtual realities, of social media algorithms and data-driven everything, Hesse's vision becomes more relevant than ever. The question isn't whether we should abandon our sophisticated systems of knowledge and technology. They're remarkable tools that can genuinely improve human life. The question is whether we can learn to use them wisely, keeping always in mind that the point of any game, no matter how elegant or complex, is ultimately to enhance our capacity for fully human living. This is the true legacy of the Glass Bead Game, not the system itself, but the wisdom to know when to play and when to put the pieces away and step into the unpredictable, imperfect, absolutely essential game of real life. Hermann Hesse's The Glass Bead Game is a profound exploration of intellectual pursuit, balance between thought and action, and the quest for meaning in life. The novel follows Joseph Knecht through his journey in Castalia, where he grapples with the tension between the serene world of the mind and the chaotic reality outside. Here are some key takeaways from the book. 1. Balance between intellect and life. Embrace both intellectual pursuits and life experiences. Knecht realizes that pure intellectualism can become a detached game if not connected to real-life experiences. Start by dedicating time each week to learning something new, while also immersing yourself in activities that ground you in the everyday world. 2. The importance of growth and change. Change is inevitable and necessary for growth. Knecht's decision to leave Castalia represents his acceptance of change. Apply this by starting incredibly small. Make one change in your routine that aligns with your values and see where it leads. 3. Unity of all knowledge. The glass bead game itself symbolizes the interconnectedness of all disciplines. Foster this idea by exploring fields outside your expertise. Read broadly and discuss ideas with people from different backgrounds to develop a holistic view. 4. Embrace lifelong learning. Knecht embodies the spirit of lifelong learning. Be patient with yourself as you cultivate this habit. Start by setting aside just 15 minutes a day to read or study something new. 5. Pursue purpose over prestige. Knecht's journey teaches us to seek purpose and meaning rather than fame or accolades. Reflect on your own motivations and consider what truly fulfills you. Then take tangible steps towards those goals, even if they start small. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you, one concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week, we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.